Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a very interesting comparison between fret leveling files and fret leveling beams. And then I'm going to tell you why I think you kind of should have both. So this is part of some maintenance and upgrade work that I'm doing on this burnt finish Telecaster. I really like this guitar, it's very interesting, but right now it's got some playability issues, and part of that stems from the fact that the fretboard isn't completely level. And as I'm sure all of you know, or most of you at least, in order for you to be able to play the guitar properly without fret buzz, without notes not working properly, the frets all have to be at the same height. We get a little bit of bow in the neck from the truss rod that allows us to play further down without having other frets ring out. But to start with, we want everything nice and flat, and then that bow gets introduced by the string tension, and you can adjust that using the truss rod. So what we need to do here is flatten this thing out, and then we're going to go ahead and do some leveling work on it. You've probably seen me do fret work before. If you haven't, I'll try to cover most of it, but check out one of my other tutorials on it for a more kind of full review of how it's done. Let's get started. Now the tools that we're going to be using today come from one of two sources. All of these really interesting anodized orange ones come from Skyscraper Guitars. They're beautiful, very high quality tools, and I'll show you which ones we're using for what in this particular video. But keep in mind that the main thing we're going to be doing is comparing these fret leveling beams, or any fret leveling beams for that matter, with a fret leveling file. The fret leveling file and all of the other tools come from Solo Music Gear. So first things first, we need to make sure that our truss rod is perfectly straight. We want our fretboard to be perfectly straight so that we have a level playing field to begin with for these frets. If the neck is bowed one way or the other and we go to level everything off, some of those are going to be lower than the others because they're making up for the bow in the neck. What we use to figure this out is a notch straight edge. This is a straight edge with little nicks in it. You want a high quality one of these generally if you're going to be doing this a lot, and this one is a beautifully high quality piece, nice and thick, no worries about it bowing or bending or not being perfectly level. They're machined to really high quality, and it's got this taper at the end, which I've been told is so that you can try and put a feeler gauge under it and things like that. So if I go ahead and put this down on the fretboard, it moves a bit because the neck's not completely straight. What I need to do, the neck is that way. I need to turn my truss rod to loosen it a little bit, so turn it to the left so that the neck can straighten out a bit. I'm going to get my Allen wrench and do that right now. All right, so there we go. That's perfectly flat now. That is step one. Don't need that anymore. Now, you should be protecting your fretboard in some fashion, or you have to be very careful. In this particular case, I'm going to be careful because I don't like to waste a whole bunch of tape taping up the entire fretboard. When we get to a subsequent video where I'm rounding fret ends and polishing, you'll see how I like to do it instead. So what I'm going to do now in order to make this easier is I'm going to remove the nut. You can do that either just by taking it out, if it allows you to do that, or if yours is glued in such that it won't allow you. Very tiny chisel. This is an 1/8 inch chisel, fits in there perfectly. And if you're in a situation where you need it, you can just use this to pop it right out. Big thank you to Solo Music Gear for sending me that. I'm going to put my nut there somewhere where I can find it. If you've got a dirty mind, well, enjoy what I just said there. And we'll move right along. Now, typically what you would do before you go ahead and start leveling is you'd take a fret rocker. This fret rocker has some measurements on it, so you can also use it as a string height gauge. Beautiful fret rocker from Skyscraper Guitars. I'll put their link in the description. Check them out if you want, if you're looking for any of this stuff. But you take a fret rocker and go ahead and check for stuff like that. Situations where it rocks, you want it to bridge 3 frets, which is why it's got different lengths on each side, so that as you make your way down here, you can use smaller sides for frets that are closer together. You want it to bridge 3, and when it does, you test and see if it rocks. And if it rocks, it means either the middle fret is high or one of the other two is low. And you can check that by continuing to move along here. Anyway, this one we're going to level off anyway, so I don't need to be checking for that because I'm not going to be doing just one fret. And I know that there are problems with this guitar because I've played it. So I'm going to go ahead and start the leveling process here. Pardon me, my hand is itchy. When you're using a fret leveling beam, this is useful. It's really good for rounding fret ends, and it can get the job done for leveling. But what you really want is a nice long one. And Skyscraper actually makes a longer one. Ideally, if you've got one the length of your fretboard and you can do it in small motions, you run less risk of having situations where, for example, these frets get sanded down further because they're in contact with more of the beam. That is one of the advantages of a leveling beam. It's longer, so it does allow for that. Now these come with this adhesive sandpaper, a couple sheets of it, and I have 180 grit and 400 grit. So for the initial leveling, you want to use the more aggressive stuff. That's going to be the 180 grit. Make sure I've got these separated properly. So what I'm going to do is take a piece of the 180 grit here, and I'm going to cut it in half. Stretch it out a little bit, put it right down the middle, press it down, and then we'll put the 400 grit piece along the top. And I got a little bit hanging off here to make it nice and easy to peel off when the time comes. Beautiful. When we do our leveling, we want to take as little as possible off of the frets. We don't want to wear them all the way down, and really we want to have them as close to crowned as possible so there's less work for us later. So the easiest way to go about this is to simply mark the tops of the frets with a Sharpie. And be careful when you're doing this. You don't want to be drawing on your fretboard if you can avoid it. That's why part of why a lot of people like to tape their entire fretboard. But anyway, we're going to mark the tops with the Sharpie, and then we're going to sand or file until we've just removed that Sharpie, or at least a thin line down the middle of it. Now generally, you're going to find that a fret leveling file is more aggressive than a fret leveling beam. Of course, that depends on what kind of sandpaper, what grit you're using, but generally speaking, that's the case. And that's part of why it's going to be effective and helpful to have both, because you can take some off when your frets really need some work with the file, and then you can go in with the high grit sandpaper and finish it off with the beam. Let's give you a closer look at this real quick before we get started. Okay, so now we can basically get started on this. The last thing that I'm going to do before that, because I'm taking off a little bit of metal here and pickups are magnetic, is I'm going to go ahead and cover this pickup, and just to be on the safe side, the body on either side of the pickup. So that'll keep that safe, and then we of course want to avoid causing any trouble up here, but that really shouldn't be an issue at all. And I can take a quick look at my file here, determine which way it cuts, and go ahead and start filing. Now what we want to do is keep even pressure on this, do nice even strokes, and we need to respect the curve of the fretboard. So the fretboard and the frets have a radius on them. We can't just go flat. We need to respect that curve as we work our way across. Now some people use a radiused block for this. I don't like to do that personally. I prefer to use one of these tools that we've established here and go ahead and just move along in even increments so that I'm taking into account the radius of the fretboard. right, so that took off some material, and if we bring you in closer here, and I apologize if this is shaky, it will be. I'm taking you off of the, taking you off of the tripod right here, so that we can get you a closer look. If we bring you in closer here and focus in, you can see that some of that Sharpie has been removed from a lot of these. But for example, this one was low, and that's why most of that Sharpie is still there, whereas over here and over here, more of it has been removed. And that's the case as you move down. So these files work quite quickly. You can see they've taken off a lot, but there are still some low spots and some work to do. Now again, the objective here is to remove as little material as possible. So I'm not going to re-Sharpie them, but I'm going to go ahead and use this now and do something very similar. Again, taking into account that radius, we're going to work our way back over top again. And continue our gentle leveling work. Now we're still seeing some low spots here, unfortunately, so we're not completely there yet. We could continue with either one of the methods that we've just done. We could continue to use our fret leveling file, or we could continue to use our aggressive sandpaper. But because we're getting down to the short strokes, so to speak, and we have less material that we need to remove, what I'm going to do now is use the finer 400 grit sandpaper to both finish this off and remove some of those heavier scratches at the same time. And this is one of the benefits to a fret leveling beam, is that you can change grits part way through. You can move from that 180 grit back down to the 400 grit. So this is a beautiful tool for that purpose, and it works really well. The Skyscraper Guitars ones are beautiful, like I said, so check them out. But I believe Solo Music Gear is also working on getting some, and they're probably going to be a little bit more affordable, which is nice. Now once you've got your frets leveled off, like we do now, we've got to crown them, we've got to polish them, we've got to round over our fret ends, and really we should round over the entire edge of the fretboard. Now that's something that you can do either with a file, if that's your preference, or with a beam, and I prefer to use the smaller beams to accomplish that. So I'm going to throw some sandpaper on here and do that, but that's going to be in another video. So guys, that covers our comparison between fret leveling beams and fret leveling files. If it were up to me, and for me it is up to me, I like to have both. I think they both serve a purpose, and you know, this is really nice. It's very easy to travel with and everything, and you can do everything you need to with this. But frankly, if I only had one, if I could only have one, I would probably go for a fret leveling beam, especially if I'm keeping it in my garage or somewhere where I don't have to pack it, because this guy, again, very small and compact. Downsides to this, well, it doesn't remove material as quickly unless you're using high-grade sandpaper. You have to replace the sandpaper. It does wear out, so there's an ongoing cost associated with that. That's really the gist of it. You got to kind of get this sticky stuff, or use the super glue and masking tape trick or something like that. Downsides to this, slightly less versatile, but you never have to really replace anything on it. The file itself should probably last you pretty much a lifetime. You just have to clean it once in a while at most. So guys, as always, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Check out the links in the description if you want any of this stuff, and stay tuned because we're going to be doing some more work to this guitar coming up very shortly. We're going to have to crown these frets. We're going to have to work on the fret ends. We're going to have to polish them. It's all kind of part of the process. It just doesn't fit within the purview of comparing the fret leveling file and the fret leveling beam. So we're going to do it in separate videos. Again, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Have a good one.